Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's December 11th, and we have a lot to talk about. And I want to start by talking about the difference between a fact and a belief. I'll tell you why. I received an email from someone who listens to the podcast asking me if I'd talk about a device that they said would be really useful in keeping people with MS from overheating. Now, this device looks a little like a cross between an Apple Watch and a bracelet, but it's neither. It's a small device that you wear on your wrist, and it uses electrical current to cool your wrist when you're feeling warm or warm your wrist when you're feeling cool. The way this works is that because your wrist feels cool, your brain gets fooled into thinking that you feel cool, and the next thing you know, you're a little more comfortable. But what this device doesn't do is actually change your core body temperature, and they tell you that up front, so no one's trying to fool anyone here. But the thing is, when someone with MS overheats, it's because their core body temperature has gone up. And things like cooling vests are actually designed to lower your core body temperature, and that's why cooling vests work for people with MS. And it's why this new device really won't work for people with MS. So I sent an email back explaining all of this to the listener who had suggested that I talk about this new device on the podcast, and they responded, thanking me for the additional information, and then adding that they still believe that this device could be helpful in keeping people with MS from overheating. So this was someone who was willing to set aside the facts in order to embrace their belief. But no matter how hard we want something to be true, beliefs aren't facts. When it comes to science, like the MS research that we talk about on the podcast, a fact is something that can be proven through direct evidence. That's why I talk about clinical trial results. These objective results are arrived at through a transparent scientific process. I want to mention this because I get requests to talk about topics like that cool little wrist device or the effect of diet on MS. But as of today, we don't have many facts about how diet impacts MS. Now, I know there are a lot of people who have strongly held beliefs that one particular diet or another can slow MS progression and even reverse its effects. And I never want to cast doubt on anyone's personal experience. But we don't always know why those personal experiences actually occur. The challenge lies in taking that anecdotal experience and duplicating it under rigorous scientific conditions to produce a measurable result that can be duplicated over and over again with confidence. And when it comes to the subject of how diet mitigates multiple sclerosis, I hope that we're talking about that one day, but that day hasn't yet come. Now, some facts shouldn't be ignored. Eating a healthy diet is a smart lifestyle choice for everyone. That's a fact. We know that a healthy diet promotes better cardiovascular health for anyone. And it seems logical that avoiding excess weight, avoiding obesity, makes mobility easier for everyone. But whether one diet or another has a specific impact on MS, well, today, that's a belief. And should it become a fact, I hope you know that I'll be among the first to be talking about it. Now, a subject that I do want to talk about today is how AI, artificial intelligence, is about to change so many aspects of how medicine is being practiced. And to give you a little context, I want to share a quick story. An engineer working for Google had an interest in outer space. Now, this particular engineer specialized in artificial intelligence, and using an AI technology called machine learning, he used millions of photos taken from NASA satellites, and one of Google's most powerful computers started teaching itself to recognize certain patterns so that it could tell the difference between the deep space images of stars and the deep space images of planets. Now, these were stars and planets from distant solar systems. Well, after the computer had learned these different patterns, the engineer had the computer examine a data set of 15,000 signals or images from NASA's Kepler telescope. And the computer discovered 2 planets in a distant solar system. Now, you might be wondering what this story has to do with MS research. Well, as you're hearing this story, there's research underway to use the same machine learning approach to analyze MRI images. One study is being funded by the International Progressive MS Alliance, and it involves using machine learning to analyze MRI images in an effort to identify an imaging biomarker for progressive MS. Now, we already use MRI imaging to diagnose MS and to treat progression. But what if a powerful computer using machine learning examined a huge data set of MRI images looking for patterns, just like the computer at Google looked at images of outer space? And what if that computer could identify something in that huge data set of MRI images that would be consistent in all of the MRI images of people with progressive MS, something that wouldn't be found on any MRI images of people with relapsing remitting MS, something that would have been missed, just like NASA engineers using more traditional technology missed those 2 planets. Discovering an imaging biomarker could help neurologists identify, diagnose, and begin treatment for someone with progressive MS long before they become symptomatic. And that's just one scenario of how artificial intelligence might change healthcare. My guest on the podcast today is Dr. Chase Spurlock, the founder and CEO of iQuity. iQuity is a company that's using its expertise in machine learning to improve patient care, drive the creation of new therapies, and reduce the costs associated with managing chronic illness, including multiple sclerosis. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Spurlock, there are a few other things that you should know about. Last week, I told you about the safety alert that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued for Gilenya. Well, this week, I want to tell you about the safety alert that the FDA has issued for Lemtrada. The alert warns about a rare but life-threatening risk of stroke or artery rupture for people taking Lemtrada for relapsing forms of MS. Now, the FDA approved Lemtrada in 2014, and since then, there have been 13 reported cases of stroke or tears in the head and neck arteries that all took place shortly after a Lemtrada IV infusion. Now, the FDA has added its warning to both the drug label and the patient medication guide, and the FDA has made this a boxed warning, which is its highest warning level. MS patients and their caregivers are advised to seek immediate emergency treatment if the patient experiences signs or symptoms of stroke or tears in the head and neck arteries. Now, these signs include sudden numbness or weakness in the face, arms, or legs, particularly if it occurs on only one side of the body. Sudden confusion, trouble speaking, or difficulty understanding speech. Sudden difficulties seeing in one or both eyes. Sudden difficulty walking, dizziness or loss of balance or coordination, or sudden severe headache or neck pain. Other serious adverse reactions already associated with Lemtrada have restricted distribution of the medication in the U.S., and because of its safety profile, Lemtrada is typically prescribed only after MS patients have already tried 2 other disease-modifying therapies without success. And as I said just last week when we were talking about Gilenya, this is an obvious reason that you should always discuss with your neurologist the risks and benefits associated with any new treatment. I'll include a link to the FDA's official warning in today's show notes. The holiday season can mean different things to different people. For many people, this is the time of year that unfortunately tends to underscore feelings of loneliness and isolation. Well, the MS Society in the UK has done some research that shows that people living with MS don't have to wait for the holidays to experience profound loneliness. According to a report issued last week, 3 in 5 people living with MS in the UK experience loneliness due to their illness. Now that's 12 times the number of people who experience loneliness in the general population. 58% of the people living with MS in the UK feel isolated, and 42% feel both lonely and isolated. Now, the study was based on an online survey of 869 people living with multiple sclerosis. I don't think that people affected by MS, especially progressive MS, are particularly surprised by the results of this survey. One of the more dispiriting and maybe unexpected aspects of MS is that as it progresses, friends start falling away. Phone calls, texts, and visits become less frequent. As my wife's caregiver, people have actually told me that they no longer know what to say. Some have shared that seeing the progression of her disease is upsetting and even depressing to them. They struggle with the fact that they no longer have much in common with someone whom at one time, they shared a lot in common with. And often, people don't say anything at all. They just sort of fade. Well, it's a tough thing to watch, and I imagine it's 10 times tougher to experience firsthand. But as I've talked with other families affected by MS, I've noticed that this scenario isn't that unusual. And that actually suggests an opportunity, because today we can do better. We're living in a time when connecting with others has never been easier. Technology provides all kinds of ways for people affected by MS to connect with others with whom they do share a lot in common. There are an almost unlimited number of online communities built upon common interest. Now, sure, there are online communities that are specific to multiple sclerosis, and there are online communities that are specific to caregiving, but there are also virtual communities that focus on every other kind of interest someone might have, from Japanese anime to jazz, from cooking and cocktails to coding. So if you're experiencing a sense of isolation or loneliness, maybe it's time to meet some new friends. Some online communities serve as hubs for local face-to-face meetups. Others keep all of the interaction online, so you can really find ways to connect that are going to suit you best and most comfortably. Living your best life with MS often means finding new ways to do things. And there's probably never been more ways to avoid feelings of loneliness and isolation than all the ways that we have at our fingertips today. The MS Society in the UK has pulled back the curtain on one aspect of MS that isn't often talked about. We're all social beings. Each of us does better once we find our tribe. And finding your tribe has never been easier. So I hope this is a holiday season that you decide to connect. MS affects women more than men. That's something that you hear fairly often. Well, a research team in Switzerland wanted to know more. They were interested in looking at the female-to-male ratio in MS diagnosis as it related to age and as it related to the different subtypes of MS. So they collected data from 945 MS patients being treated in MS centers in Greece, Switzerland, and Germany, along with data from previous retrospective MS studies. And their analysis indicated that the ratio of women diagnosed with MS was 1.9 times higher than that of men, except when it came to being diagnosed with primary progressive MS, in which case men were twice as likely to be diagnosed with primary progressive MS than women. Their analysis also showed that women were being diagnosed earlier than men. The average age of women at the time of diagnosis was 34 years old, and the average age of men at the time of diagnosis was almost 39 years old. Something I found particularly interesting in this study was that the higher prevalence of women diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS declined with age. There's actually a gender switch at age 58, when more men are diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS than women. So this led the research team to speculate about whether female sex hormones are associated with stronger autoimmune responses, and male sex hormones are somehow predisposed to greater neurodegeneration as MS progresses. So this gender switch that occurs at age 58 seems to indicate that there's more to it than simply saying MS affects women more than men. And I'm sure we're going to see further research focused on better understanding the why behind these shifting gender-related differences in MS. If you're interested in learning more about this research, I'll include a link to the study in today's show notes. MedDay Pharmaceuticals announced that a Phase 3 clinical trial designed to confirm the potential of high-dose biotin in treating progressive MS is fully enrolled. MedDay has recruited 642 people with primary and secondary progressive MS who are relapse-free but show signs of disease progression. Now, the study participants will be given either 100 milligrams of biotin in capsule form 3 times a day or a placebo, and the study will run for at least 15 months. Its primary goal is to determine whether high-dose biotin is effective in slowing or stopping MS progression. The trial will take place in 90 sites around the world, including 48 in the US and Canada, 39 in Europe, and 3 in Australia. MedDay projects the first results of the clinical trial to be available in early 2020, and the company is planning on filing a new drug application with the FDA and a marketing authorization agreement with the European Medicines Agency later that same year. Stay tuned, and I'll keep you updated as news of this clinical trial becomes available. Artificial intelligence is already impacting how we do some of the most mundane activities imaginable, like shopping online. But we're at a point in time when AI is poised to alter the healthcare landscape. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Dr. Chase Spurlock, whose company, iQuity, is leading the way in adapting artificial intelligence technology to change how chronic illness is diagnosed and managed. This past summer, I told you about a company called iQuity because they had announced the launch of an artificial intelligence-driven platform that was shown to be able to predict the onset of MS in patients at least 8 months earlier than traditional methods would have been able to make the same diagnosis. And this new data analysis platform could make that MS diagnosis with greater than 90% accuracy. Now, we know that the earlier that MS patients begin disease-modifying therapy, the more effective their treatment can be in delaying disease progression and increasing their quality of life. So, taking advantage of iQuity's data analysis platform means diagnosing MS earlier, beginning treatment sooner, and enjoying a better quality of life longer as a result. And that sounds to me like a pretty big gain. My guest today is Dr. Chase Spurlock, the founder and CEO of iQuity. And we're talking about the work that iQuity is doing and the role that AI, artificial intelligence, is beginning to play in healthcare. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Spurlock.
Thank you for having me on.
I guess a good place to start our conversation is with a definition. iQuity's expertise is in an application of artificial intelligence called machine learning. Can you help us understand what machine learning is and how it might work in helping to develop innovative approaches to healthcare?
Yeah, so machine learning is really a process where you teach a computer to be able to detect certain patterns in data and to be able to do that first accurately, but also reproducibly. And one of the first applications that we use machine learning for is to create blood-based tests for the detection of autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis included. And what we were able to do was to throw a lot of data at the computer and ask it to pull out specific patterns for diseases, and to be able to do this across populations of patients that we were testing. So whether it's a healthy individual or a multiple sclerosis patient or a patient with a condition that may mimic MS, we were able to define, with the computer's help, very specific patterns for a disease. Multiple sclerosis is one example. And I think that's really at the heart of what people need to understand about machine learning and the foundation of artificial intelligence, is that it's being able to look at a data set, and we talk a lot about bias in data, but really let the data speak for itself, to say, here are all the data elements that we can amass and generate about a particular disease or about a particular individual, and then let that computer pull out the patterns that give the most signal or give the most definition for what you're studying. And I think that's sometimes people think of artificial intelligence as this big scary thing that's going to suddenly replace doctors. But we have to remember that it's a tool. It's a tool to be able to see patterns and connections in data that may not be apparent to the even well-trained eye. So that's it in a nutshell.
I think you made a very good point. I think when people think about or talk about artificial intelligence, they sometimes see it as a big scary thing. They sometimes think of it maybe as a subset of science fiction. But I think what people may not realize is that when Amazon.com recommends a product that you might like, that recommendation is a result of sophisticated machine learning. And subtle applications like Amazon's recommendation engine have changed online selling, which we all take advantage of. Well, it's changed it in huge ways. And I feel that we're kind of at an inflection point where we're seeing artificial intelligence, machine learning being applied to healthcare in a whole variety of ways. So how do you see machine learning impacting something like neurology as a category, as a specialization? How might it affect the role of a physician in diagnosing and treating illnesses like MS?
Well, I think it allows them to harness collective power to a greater extent than they've been able to before. And, just like, we've used it to look at blood-derived data sets or even population-level data from, thousands of individuals, you're able to use that collective brain power of other physicians, other patients, perhaps in even different geographies, to then make better, well-informed decisions. I think that there's this goal in healthcare, and I think that experience teaches physicians that with every patient they treat, the next patient will receive the benefit of that experience. And, that's how you become a seasoned provider. You're able to build wisdom as you engage in the practice of medicine. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to build tools that leverage collective brain power of hundreds, if not thousands, of different providers to be able to then deliver that in an actionable way to point of care, so that any provider can tap into that collective brain power and the thousands of patient journeys represented by the data that's used to build those tools. And it's all about efficiency. It's creating opportunities for more efficient interactions by expediting care for those who need it the most, and by being able to avoid pitfalls that doctors may not have been able to perceive without these tools. And a lot of the doctors that I talk to, they say, I've got a brief window of time to collect information from the patient, to talk with them, and I see them again 3-6 months later, and there's not a lot of data that I can collect in real time, between these interactions. I think that one of the benefits of machine learning is that we can give information at that first interaction before the follow up to say, here's the persona of this patient and what journey they might experience, between clinical visits or over the next 12 months. I think there's a lot of predictive power and foresight that we can give to doctors that they haven't had access to through building predictive classifications and through building predictive machine learning platforms.
You mentioned the efficiencies that are presented when you use tools like sophisticated machine learning. I imagine that those efficiencies carry with them a strong value proposition. A diagnosis that's aided or supported by machine learning could represent a pretty strong value proposition for the payer. And I'm wondering if we're at the point where insurance companies are getting comfortable with the idea of basing treatment direction and decision on a machine learning platform.
Well, I think that any analytics platform is still going to rest on the doctor's decision making and what they choose to do with that information. I think that we have to recognize that diagnosis of MS and treatment of MS remains firmly in the hands of the doctors who diagnose and treat these patients. But I think that what payers can do and other analytics firms can do is to give guidance to the doctor to say that in order to, and especially as we think about, the evolution towards value-based care, we can say that, there are certain pathways that would promote the optimal outcome, and we can give that information to the doctor so that they can make a more informed decision. And it's a data-driven decision. And I think that, it's advice that we're giving to the doctor as they treat the patient that's in front of them. That I think that payers, recognize the power of analytics, and the payers that we talk to are looking for ways to augment their existing analytics strategy. But I think that a lot of these strategies that are in place, they're not always fully prescriptive. To say with this patient, you treat with this specific drug. I think that's a bit of the holy grail. To be able to say, patients diagnosed today, I know this particular patient will perform best on drugs A, B, or C. I think we're marching towards that, particularly in the case of MS, and I think that there are a lot of great solutions out there that are helping us approach that goal. But I think that it's not fully to that point. I think that I think we're still a ways away from being at that point of being fully prescriptive. I think that we can give some alerts to kind of rough in the solution to say that these are patients heading towards a diagnosis. And then this is in our case, what we found is that, it's easier to be able to tell the patients that are heading towards a diagnosis, those patients that may have signals to indicate misdiagnosis. I think it's easier to anticipate an adverse event in our world. But to become fully prescriptive to link a patient to the right drug, I think that becomes a much deeper clinical question that we're still trying to parse out. And we've got a number of approaches internally that we're working to fully investigate to be able to get to that point. And but I still think that being fully prescriptive is a ways off.
I'm curious as to what some of the obstacles to the adoption of AI in healthcare might be. Do you see them as largely cultural issues where people are still kind of defining it as some sort of subset of science fiction, or are there other obstacles that also need to be overcome?
Well, I think that one of the biggest obstacles is alert fatigue, and a lot of doctors, they get a number of different alerts throughout the day, and they become, as numb to it. And one of the things that analytics firms are constantly working to overcome is trying to build an alert that the doctor or the provider recognizes as credible, and to get them to act upon that. So one of the steps that we've taken in our thought process is to try to give some color behind every alert that we deliver, to say that, this is an alert for a patient that is trending towards a diagnosis, and then here are 3 or 4 reasons why we think that this is true, and to help them understand kind of the logic behind why the computer or the machine, or any sort of algorithm is pulling this particular patient out of the mix and shining a light on that particular individual. So trying to articulate some reasoning and some logic. All too often, I think these alerts are simply alerts. It's suspect sepsis, or suspect heart disease, or heart-related issues, and that's it. There's no follow-up. There's no context provided. So, but by being able to provide context, I think you increase the likelihood that a physician or a provider will be able to understand, and then would want to act upon that alert. I find that there's an enormous willingness to listen to these types of advances and to consider their applications. But I think that it's incumbent upon us as data analytics firms to be able to help doctors understand the magic, to understand the black box that's allowing this particular innovation to be delivered.
We've been talking about the very large field of AI and its potential application to healthcare. Tell us about iQuity's role in what has to be described as a rapidly evolving landscape.
So iQuity is the first company to be able to go into a particular data set, a population level data set, or even a blood-derived data set, and then build tools based on RNA or based on these population data sets that's fully predictive for a number of different autoimmune conditions, multiple sclerosis in particular. We're trying to be champions of the autoimmune and related condition space because we recognize that autoimmune disease affects 50 million Americans according to the AARDA, and that's right up there with the big boys, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So we're really trying to shine a light on what might be a small percentage of the entire population, but a population that's commanding an enormous cost, particularly in healthcare. And I think that, one thing, some business executives may not realize is that, we can't cure these diseases, but if you treat them and you treat them properly and you get on them quickly and treat them aggressively, you can help stave off that progression of disease so that the disability curve is minimized. And in the case of MS, that's preserving brain health. It's preserving mobility. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to minimize that patient's journey and that patient's progression up and along the disability curve. And up until now, I feel like doctors have been far too reactive, and our tools are going to allow them to be more proactive, to be able to anticipate and to predict those events that are coming down the pipe, and to be able to craft treatment plans well in advance of the explosion of some of these diseases, or having a patient come in in full-on relapse or having a major flare of disease, before it gets to the critical mass, we can head it off at the pass and help the patient have the best experience possible.
Well, if people want to find out more about what iQuity is doing, where can people find more information about iQuity?
They can find us on the web at iQuity.com, iQuity.com, or feel free to shoot us an email. Our info at iQuity.com is a great way to get in touch with us and to figure out ways either to engage with us directly through a collaboration. We're constantly engaged in new projects, and our business is always expanding. We focus on autoimmune, focus on these chronic diseases like multiple sclerosis in particular, but we're always looking for new opportunities. So would welcome the chance to talk with anyone.
Dr. Spurlock, let me first thank you for leading the way in terms of innovation for perhaps next generation MS diagnosis and care. And thank you as well for taking time to talk with me today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on, John.
Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. If you haven't yet, I hope you visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or device. It's the easiest way for you to stay connected to the podcast. You'll never miss an episode, and the app allows me to share all sorts of bonus content with you. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.